tracking down the illegal alien criminals. We're detaining them, and we are throwing them the hell out of our country. We have no apologies, and we're moving forward very fast. They're very dangerous.
Okay, so have you heard about this? The U.S. is using military planes to deport undocumented immigrants.
I have. It's
I mean, when I first saw this on ABC News, it was kind of mind-blowing.
yeah.
Military planes. It sounds like something out of a movie, but it's actually happening right now.
Right.
It's wild. So we're going to try to figure this out. Like, why is this happening? What does this mean?
Yeah, what's the context here? Is this something we should expect to see more of?
Right. What does it mean for the future? So let's dive right in.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So like right off the bat, you see these images in the news segment. Marines with a ton of equipment. Osprey aircraft on the tarmac.
Wow.
Migrants in restraints boarding C-17s. Those Osprey aircraft at the border, that's a pretty strong visual, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's a very deliberate choice meant to project a certain image.
Right. It's not subtle. They're taking off from Fort Bliss, Texas, and Tucson, Arizona, headed for Guatemala.
Yeah, and the scale of this is something else. They're talking about 1,500 active duty troops deployed, 160 migrants on those first flights.
And over 500 undocumented migrants arrested across the country in just 24 hours. Like, it's a massive operation.
Exactly. This is a major undertaking, no doubt about it.
And they're not exactly keeping it low-key either. Tom Homan, who you might remember as the Trump administration's border czar, he's front and center in this report.
Yeah, I remember him.
He's saying these deportation efforts are going very well and are only the beginning. He even said the military will be used every single day to deport migrants.
Every single day. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. And then he says this.
We're steadily increased the number of arrests nationwide as we open up the aperture. Right now it's concentrating public safety threats, national security threats. That's a smaller population. So we're going to do this on priority base, as President Trump's promised, but as that aperture opens, there'll be more arrests nationwide. If you're in the country illegally, you're on the table.
That's interesting. That raises some questions, doesn't it?
For sure.
Like, who exactly is on the table?
Yeah, initially it seemed like they were targeting undocumented immigrants who had committed serious crimes.
Right.
But this quote from Homan seems to suggest a wider net. Which, I mean, that brings up a lot of issues. Like, is that even legal? I know you mentioned due process before. Can you explain what that means in this situation?
Sure. So basically, due process means everyone has the right to a fair hearing before the government can take away their freedom.
Okay.
So if you have mass arrests and deportations happening really fast, there's a question of whether people are actually getting that fair hearing.
I see. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And this is where all the pushback is coming from. Right?
Exactly.
The mayor of Newark, New Jersey was really critical of this whole thing.
Yeah, he was.
He called out ICE for conducting raids without warrants and even detaining American citizens by mistake. It's kind of scary to think.
Obviously, some ICE agents raided a business in our city without a warrant. They went in the back of the establishment. We believe that there were 3 people who they say were undocumented that they detained, but they also detained folks that were, in fact, citizens of this country. One person showed their military veteran identification and was still questioned anyway.
Which brings us to the administration's strategy of self-deportation.
Yeah, self-deportation. When I first heard that term, I was honestly baffled.
I can imagine.
Like, what does that even mean? Are people really just going to pack their bags and leave?
Well, the idea is to make things in the U.S. so difficult and risky for undocumented immigrants that they'll choose to leave on their own.
So it's basically like making life so miserable that they have no other choice.
Basically, yeah. The logic is if they're convinced they'll get caught anyway, they'll leave voluntarily to avoid that whole process.
I see. But it doesn't feel very ethical, does it?
That's a huge point of contention. Critics argue that it's inhumane and basically turns the system into a tool of fear and intimidation.
And I guess it could even backfire, right?
It could. People might make desperate, dangerous choices if they feel trapped.
That's a good point. So we've got this huge shift in U.S. immigration enforcement with the military being called in and this whole idea of self-deportation. It feels like we're just at the beginning of this, not the end.
I think that's right. And the fact that they're using military aircraft for deportation, that's a really big deal.
Yeah, I mean,
It raises questions about the line between immigration enforcement and military actions. What message are we sending to the world? What does it say about how we view immigrants?
it's really intense, this whole thing. And I have to be honest, it makes me wonder about the human cost of all this.
Yeah, it's important to think about that.
What happens to families when someone is deported? What about people who are fleeing violence or persecution? Like, are we just turning our backs on them?
Those are really important questions. We need to stay informed, engage in these discussions, and think critically about these policies.
Okay.
It's happening in our name, after all.
Exactly. And it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out in the next few weeks and months. To think about.
A lot to think about.
Yeah,
It's going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds.
it is. A lot to keep an eye on.
For sure.
Thanks for joining me today.
Of course, my pleasure.
We'll be back next time
Looking forward to it.
with another deep dive
Sounds good.
into the news.
See you then.
See ya.